Hi, I'm Krista, an archaeologist here with the Ohio History Connection. I work for the State Historic Preservation Office, and today we're going to talk about historic cemeteries, where I specialize in historic documentation, research, and preservation of historic cemeteries here in Ohio. So why is cemetery preservation important? Cemeteries give us tangible links to historic events and people. Every person buried in a cemetery has a story of their life, the impression they made on the world. The gravestone is their final impression. Have you ever visited a cemetery? Do you have any family buried in a cemetery? Today you'll learn about things that you can look for when you visit a cemetery and what you can learn from the gravestones around you. So here's some Ohio Cemetery 101 facts. There's over 14,600 documented cemeteries in the state of Ohio. Only about 4,100 of those cemeteries are active, meaning burials are currently taking place. Over 10,500 cemeteries in Ohio are inactive, meaning that there has not been any burial in the last 25 years. Many of these cemeteries are historic and small family cemeteries. Cemeteries in Ohio can be privately owned or located on public property. Cemetery access and permission. So many cemeteries in Ohio are located on private property. You must request permission from the owner before accessing a privately owned cemetery. If you're not sure who owns a cemetery, you can look up the property on your county auditor's website. Here's some 3 different types of markers you'll find in cemeteries: headstones, footstones, and family plot markers. Family plot markers usually just include the surnames of the people buried in a larger family plot. Headstones include artwork and carvings, the name of the person, their birth date, their death date, and other information. And a footstone is oftentimes confused with a baby or a child's gravestone. It just has initials, in this case, in the picture, MSG. It marks literally the head and the foot of the person buried in a cemetery. So here's some different gravestone materials that you'll find here in Ohio. Granite. Granite is almost exclusively used nowadays in cemeteries. Marble, limestone, and sandstone, and also brownstone, which is a type of sandstone. In the pictures, you'll see on the top, this is an example of granite, and the middle is marble. Marble disintegrates very easily over the years, so the pictures and the carvings actually start to melt over time. And the very last picture is brownstone. Here's some alternative gravestone materials: slate, metal, concrete, and folk art materials. Slate is not very common here in Ohio. You find slate markers more common on the East Coast, with cemeteries that date to the 1600s and 1700s. Metal, you can see the metal marker here on the far right. And concrete and other types of folk art markers can be popular in certain cultural cemeteries, and maybe cemeteries where people just simply couldn't have afforded a regular gravestone. White bronze is also a fun thing to look for if you're visiting a cemetery. White bronze markers were made by the Monumental Bronze Company of Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1874 to 1914. They were actually sold door to door and from a catalog. They're made out of almost pure zinc, and they resemble marble at a distance. So if you find a white bronze marker, go up to it and knock on it. Very gently, of course. It'll sound like metal, and it's actually hollow on the inside. These markers look almost just as good as the day they were first installed. Here's some gravestone iconography, or artwork and carvings that you'll find on gravestones. Most cemeteries in Ohio are Victorian era, so you'll find symbols that are very specific to the Victorian era. Also religious symbols, fraternal organizations, military-related, profession-related, and here's an example of a good book to reference if you would like to learn more about gravestone iconography. Stories in Stone, a field guide to cemetery symbolism and iconography. Here's some examples of different iconography that you'll find if you visit a historic cemetery. Angels, crosses, Star of David, and other religious symbols are abundant in both historic and modern gravestones. The Woodsman of the World shown here is a fraternal benefit society that was established in 1890. They carried life insurance for their members and included a gravestone as a benefit. Shaking, clasping, and pointing hands are common. Often, clasping hands represent a farewell to a spouse. The woman's hand, to the left in this picture, is recognizable by the puffy sleeve, common in Victorian fashion. So if you visit a cemetery and you can find shaking, clasping, or pointing hands, look at the cuffs of the clothing of the person in the picture. You'll be able to find out if the person pointing is a man or a woman. Flowers, ivy, and other foliage is very common on Victorian gravestone, and each have their own special meaning. This gravestone has many symbols. The lamb, which is common on children's gravestones, mourns at the base of a gravestone with a weeping willow tree close by. Sometimes even there's pictures of gravestones on gravestones. The anchor represents hope and steadfastness. They can also be found on gravestones of seamen as a professional symbol. Even sometimes, cause of death can be found depicted on a gravestone. This gravestone shows a man who died while being struck by lightning in his sleep. Animals are also sometimes carved onto gravestones. This one-of-a-kind gravestone shows an elephant named Chief, who unfortunately killed his circus handler, John King, in 1880. Carvers' initials and their location and other information can be found on a gravestone. Check the bottom right or bottom left-hand corners of the gravestone, which may have sunken underground over time. Terminology. The Victorians often used terminology that we just don't see as much nowadays. This is what I most common get questions on, is the use of the terms consort and relict. They apply exclusively to women's gravestones. A consort is the wife who died before her husband, and a relict is what we nowadays call a widow. It's a wife who died after her husband and never remarried. So what to always do in a cemetery? Treat the cemetery, the stones, and its inhabitants with respect. Always ask permission to enter a cemetery located on private property. And always ask permission from a cemetery owner before taking on any kind of preservation projects. That includes gravestone cleaning or the placement of veteran flags, for example. And what to not do in a cemetery. Never climb on, lean against, or play around gravestones. Gravestones are very heavy and they can cause you serious injury if they fall on you. Gravestone rubbing is also not recommended, as it can damage fragile headstones. And never use products like shaving cream, flour, or chalk to bring out a carving on a gravestone. These products can damage the stone over time. Here's an activity that you can do in a cemetery. It's called the mirror effect. It uses a mirror to reflect sunlight that can help bring out the carving on a worn stone. Mirrors can range from full-length bedroom mirrors, aluminum foil attached to cardboard, or a car windshield sunshade. Simply angle the mirror close to the gravestone to reflect the sunlight and bring out the carving to allow for easier reading and photographing. Here's an example of two people using a mirror to better light up a gravestone for easier photography. Here's another activity that you can do from home. You can look up local gravestones and cemeteries in your area. Websites like Find a Grave and the Ohio Genealogical Society's Ohio Cemetery Location Free Index allows you to look up cemeteries in your area. You can look up individuals buried in cemeteries, famous people, or generally any cemeteries in your area. Maybe you can look a couple up and then go visit them. And here's some additional research you can do from home. Check out some great webinars on the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training's website. Go to this web link and simply search for cemeteries. You will find lots of different webinars and instructions on how to care and preserve for cemeteries. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Krista Horrocks, a cemetery preservationist here at the Ohio History Connection. You can find my contact information here. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions about Ohio cemeteries or preservation work in Ohio cemeteries. And please join us for other activities at the following website, ohiohistory.org/learn-at-home. Thanks!